Well, meanwhile, the Ukrainian government has launched an emergency hotline for Africans and Asians fleeing. Numerous allegations of Africans facing racism while attempting to leave the country have been made. African students have shared stories of mistreatment by Ukrainian security agents. Now, in a tweet, Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba said that the authorities are working intensively to ensure the safety and passage of African and Asian students. Well, for more on the evacuation efforts, Arise correspondent Adefemi Akinsanya speaks with me now live from Warsaw. Femi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Good to see you. Now, we know the flight was unable to take off because of aviation regulations, but it does seem odd that the excuses are almost characteristics of Nigerians with their timekeeping, and the ambassador almost having a very sort of relaxed attitude by saying everyone needs to work together. Surely in an evacuation it's imperative that the passengers are aware that time is not flexible.
Yes, I mean, it's a terrible stereotype in terms of timekeeping, and unfortunately that seemed to be the case, especially since, tardiness and punctuality was the underlying reason why the Nigerian refugees were not successfully evacuated on Thursday. Now, when we look at the position of the Nigerian government, especially the Nigerian ambassador to Poland, even in the report that you heard him say that, there's youthful exuberance. He's really struggled getting people out of their rooms and onto the coaches and into the airport. And while you can appreciate that it isn't an easy thing to do, evacuating people, there are valid criticisms of the process. It would be one thing if you only had a few hours notice, but from what we've heard, the embassy in Poland had days to prepare, days to relay information adequately. And, from our experience being on the ground there today, it just didn't seem as though that bit of information reached the people who desperately needed to know. So throughout the early parts of the morning, when we first went to the hotel where the bulk of the, refugees or evacuees were, there seemed to be a situation where the vast majority of them were already being lodged in the hotel by the Nigerian embassy. But, even as coaches were leaving the hotel and making their way to the airport and then being brought back to bring more and more people were turning up. It did seem as though it was a word of mouth thing. Like, if you heard about evacuation, it definitely is happening now. Come on through. So you had lots of private vehicles make drops-offs, Ubers dropping people off, bringing their bags on and rushing into the coach. It just felt as though there was just a disconnect, because if the flight that brought us from Lagos to Poland arrived at 9 a.m., which it did, just minutes after 9 actually, and the entire plan was for the return journey with the evacuees to leave at 10 a.m., you'd imagine that they would have been at the airport well in advance of our arrival, and that wasn't the case. We only had the two twin sisters waiting at the airport. So that obviously is part and parcel of a systemic issue of a lack of seriousness. This is war. This is a war zone, and there's been a fantastic effort to bring Nigerian citizens home as quickly and as safely as possible. And it is quite a shame, a bit of an embarrassment that historic effort really ended up with, you guys got your boarding passes, crossed into security, and somehow couldn't make it on the flight. It is worth noting also that when we look at the cause of the lateness, it seems as though not many people were again aware about how serious time was, even though this wasn't a humanitarian evacuation. Perhaps had this been a situation where you had your flight itineraries days in advance and you knew exactly what time you needed to be there for check-in and for when a boarding starts and ends, perhaps that would have changed the entire psyche of the process. But that didn't happen. And we're hoping that the next allotted time for this refugee mission to make its own way back to Nigeria is at 7 a.m. on Friday, and it's hoped that that will be a much different situation. So we won't have a situation where you've got airline crews reporting for duty at 8 a.m. and having to wait 5 hours for passengers, and obviously not being able to make that flight because it's against travel and aviation regulations.
Indeed, and it's just a few hours, obviously, till that plane takes off at 7 a.m. Do we know if there's any processes that have been in place to ensure that it doesn't happen, like the bus is turning up earlier than it would normally, just to get the passengers to start processing them through the airport once more?
I think at this point, experience is going to be the greatest teacher. Everyone, you saw them huddled together. The physical process of going through security and that not guaranteeing you being able to get onto the plane, the fact that you had to walk all the way back through the airport, go back to baggage claim, pick up the bags that you had just checked in, should be a great indicator of how serious punctuality always is when it comes to airline travel, and how this situation, no matter how extraordinary, isn't actually much different. So we're hoping that for the sake of the experience and not being able to fly, would definitely make sure it doesn't happen again. But there's a clear understanding of the time. So for this very same hotel that the evacuees, the vast majority of the evacuees are going to be at, they've been told that they need to be up and ready to leave at 4 a.m. and probably later, at the very latest, arrive here by 5, so they could be well arranged and properly catered for their return journey back to Nigeria. And that plane, as you know, did come from Lagos, but it is going to be returning to Abuja. And we're hoping that for the sake of these evacuees and the families who are anticipating their arrival, they'll finally be able to see their loved ones safe and sound after hearing that war had broken out in the countries that they had been settling down in.
But thank you very much indeed for joining us this evening, and stay safe whilst you're reporting there in Warsaw.